Hello there. I am teacher Susan, and I will be your instructor for today's lesson.
Today we are going to discuss three main topics: the agrarian reform effort under President Marcos, post-1986 agrarian reform, CARPER, and the future of agrarian reform in the Philippines. Now let's begin. In the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos implemented a program of agrarian reform starting in 1969. The program was made to address the problem of widespread land inequality because a majority of the population were tenants and small farmers. The president intended to redistribute land from rich landlords to poor peasants. In order to implement this effort, he established a government agency called Presidential Agrarian Reform Council that would oversee and regulate all matters concerning land reform. It also had an additional task of mass distributing land using other mechanisms such as swapping, buying out, and distributing certificates of ownership. President Marcos started by legalizing tenant farmer organizations or cooperatives so they could negotiate long-term contracts with landowners for use of their lands. This allowed farmers who had been tenants for generations to become landowners themselves and avoid paying high. The agrarian reform was a program of land distribution in the Philippines during the New Society era. Initiated in 1974, it is widely acknowledged to have helped reduce poverty significantly. President Marcos is a controversial Philippine president who has been accused of corruption and human rights violations. He is infamous for declaring martial law in the Philippines and for implementing an agrarian reform program in response to the increasing poverty in the country. The Agrarian Reform Law of 1974 was introduced when President Marcos seized power in September 1972, believing it would be a solution to alleviate poverty among farmers. The law aimed to redistribute land from private landowners to tenant farmers and landless peasants. Proclamation No. 1081 on September 21, 1972 ushered the period of the New Society. 5 days after the proclamation of martial law, the entire country was proclaimed a land reform area, and simultaneously the agrarian reform program was decreed. President Marcos enacted the following laws: Republic Act No. 6389, Code of Agrarian Reform, and RA No. 6390 of 1971, created the Department of Agrarian Reform and the Agrarian Reform Special Account Fund. It strengthens the position of farmers and expanded the scope of agrarian reform. Presidential Decree No. 2, September 26, 1972, declared the country under land reform program. It enjoined all agencies and offices of the government to extend full cooperation and assistance to the DAR. It also activated the Agrarian Reform Coordinating Council. Presidential Decree No. 27, October 21, 1972, restricted land reform scope to tenanted rice and corn lands and set the retention limit at 7 hectares. Post-1986 agrarian reform overthrow markets in the 1987 Constitution resulted in a renewed interest and attention to agrarian reforms. President Corazon Aquino envisioned agrarian reform to be the centerpiece of her administration. President Corazon Aquino came from a family of a wealthy and landed clan that owned the Shindal Luisita on July 22, 1987. Aquino issued Presidential Proclamation 131 and Executive Order 229, which outlined her land reform program. In 1998, the Congress passed Republic Act No. 6657, or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, or shall we say the CAL, which introduced the program with the same name. President Ferdinand Marcos. On 10 September 1971, President Ferdinand E. Marcos signed the Code of Agrarian Reform of the Philippines I-8NTO, which established the Department of Agrarian Reform, effectively replacing the Land Authority. In 1978, the DAR was renamed the Ministry of Agrarian Reform. President Corazon Aquino Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, or the HART, It enabled the redistribution of agricultural lands to tenants farmers from landowners who are paid in exchange by the government through just compensation and allowed them to retain not more than 5 hectares. Corporate landowners were however allowed under law to voluntarily diverse a proportion of their capital stack equity or participation in favor of their workers or other qualified beneficiaries, instead of turning over their land to the government. CARP was limited because it accomplished very little during the administration of Aquino. It only accomplished 22.5% of lung distribution in 6 years owing to the fact that Congress, dominated by the landed light, was unwilling to fund the high compensation cost of the program. It was also married in controversy since Aquino seemingly bowed down to the pressure of other relatives by allowing the stock redistribution option. Hacienda Luisita recognized itself into a corporation and distribution stocks to farmers. President Fidel Ramos. Under the term of President Ramos, CARP implementation was speeded in order to meet the 10-year time frame despite the limitations and constraints in funding logistics and participation of involved sectors. By 1996, the Department of Agrarian Reform, or DAR, distributed only 58.25% of the total area targets to be covered by the program to another 10 years. CARPER and the future of agrarian reform in the Philippines. CARPER, Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension with Reforms, Republic Act 9700, is an amendatory law that extends for another 5 years the deadline for allocating agricultural lands to farmers. It also modifies some of CARP's other clauses. An amendatory law, CARPER or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension with Reforms or the Republic Act 9700 was passed. It extended the deadline of distributing agricultural lands to the farmers for an additional 5 years. This law also amends other provisions and regulations formerly stated in the CARP. The new deadline of HARP expired in 2008, leaving 1.2 million farmer beneficiaries and 1.6 million hectares of agricultural land to be distributed to farmers in 2009. President Arroyo signed Republic Act No. 9700 or the Comprehensive Agrarian Farm Program Extension with Reforms or the HARPER. The mandatory law that extended the deadline to 5 more years. Section 30 of the law also mandates that any case and/or proceeding involving the implementation of the provisions of Part as amended, which many remain pending on June 30, 2014, shall be allowed to proceed to its finality and executed even beyond such data. From 2009 to 2014, HARPER has distributed a total of 1 million hectare of land to 900,000 farmer beneficiaries after 27 years of land reform, and through Aquino administration's 500,000 hectares of lands remain undistributed. The DAR and Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or the DENR, are the government agencies have proved incapable of fully achieving the goal of agrarian reform in the Philippines. The same problems have plagued its implementation. First is the powerful landed the light and day ineffectual bureaucracy of the Philippine government. Until these two challenges are surmounted, genuine encouragement form in the Philippines remains but a dream to Filipino farmers who have been fighting for their right of land ownership for centuries. Beneficiaries. Landless farmers, including agricultural lessees and renters, as well as regular, seasonal, and other farm workers, benefit from CARPER. In a certain landholding, qualifying tenants and regular farm workers will each receive 3 hectares before the remaining land is distributed to other qualified beneficiaries such as seasonal farm workers and other farm workers. Section 22 of CARL. The Department of Agrarian Reform, DAR, identifies, screens, and certifies potential beneficiaries' eligibility. Beneficiaries must be at least 15 years old, a resident of the barangay where the landholding is located, and have a total landholding of no more than 3 hectares. Studies funded by the United Nations Development Programme, Asian Development Bank, Food and Agriculture Organization, European Union, and the Philippine government found that poverty incidence among program beneficiaries had decreased from 47.6% to 45.2% in 2003, while it had increased from 55.1% to 56.4% among non-participating counterparts. As of December 31, 2013, the government had acquired and dispersed 6.9 million hectares of land, accounting for 88% of all CARP land. The Aquino administration has distributed 751,514 hectares of this land, or 45% of the total landholdings, to be awarded to the remaining farmer beneficiaries under this administration. DAR has already dispersed 412,782 hectares, whereas DENR has distributed 338,732 hectares. The Department of Agrarian Reform still needs to purchase 771,795 hectares between 2014 and 2016, says the report. 187,686 hectares in 2014, 198,631 hectares in 2015, and 385,478 hectares in 2016. A total of 906,652 hectares remain to be acquired by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe.